Why?
Because that's really what Satanism is to me. It's anti-Christianity.
Both the Bible and human experience make it clear that the vast majority of people who live under the power of sin and Satan are unaware of it, at least consciously. Salvation, then, is described as a process whereby God gives people grace so that they may know the truth, that they may come to their senses and escape the snare of the devil, having been taken captive by him to do his will. The Scriptures also address how these same senses can be progressively seduced until people can't tell, spiritually speaking, up from down, their right hand from their left, as they walk as the Gentiles walk, in the futility of their mind, having their understanding darkened. The eventual result, individuals and, if left unchecked, eventually a culture in which this darkness reigns, where evil becomes good and good evil, and where finally even the occult and Satan himself become acceptable, even cool.
Father Lucifer, you never look so sane. You always did prefer the drizzle to the rain. Tell me that you're still in love with that milkmaid. How the Lizzies, how's your Jesus Christ been hanging?
Sounding for all the world like Crowley and LaVey, Tori Amos told Spin magazine about her love for Lucifer, a Latin name for Satan. I wanted to marry Lucifer. Lucifer was the brother holding the space for mankind to act out their fears and hidden secrets, things they won't acknowledge. That's what the shadow is, and once you don't deny your shadow anymore, then it's not a perversion of that energy source. I don't consider Lucifer an evil force. We can all tap into that free-running current of distorted energy. She went on to talk about him on a more personal note. I feel such a sadness from him, she said. I cry and feel his presence with his music. I feel like he comes and sits on my piano. Yet this is a pretty serious being. I'm a little squirt when you think what a very serious force this is. Avant-garde artist Diamanda Gallas has admitted to tapping into this same energy. Before performances, I used to say prayers to the devil. It was like making a connection to some source of power so that I could do what was not socially accepted. It was like, you know me, you understand me, I can speak for this reality, you can help me do this. Among her many blasphemous recordings, writings, and performances is her interpretation of Baudelaire's The Litanies of Satan, which includes the final prayer in French, To thee, O Satan, glory be and praise. Grant that my soul one day beneath the tree of knowledge may rest near thee. It should come as no surprise that she has described her performances as being like a ripping of the flesh, like a bloodletting. A kind of voodoo possession? Asked the interviewer. Exactly, Gallas replied. A Ugandan who saw my performance said that what I did reminded him of a voodoo ritual, which is practiced in Uganda. That if I were performing there, I would be worshipped as a high fetish priestess. Well, Gallas and Amos have loads of company when it comes to artists who get off on this fetishistic voodoo sympathy for the devil vibe they view as the true heart and soul of the music. Robert Palmer glowingly described it as the central rock and roll paradigm, a kind of voodoo rooted in a vigorous tradition of celebrating nature and spirit that's far removed from the sober values of Western culture. David Byrne lovingly helped produce a television special about it, calling voodoo-related sound a big part of where our popular music comes from. Rock and roll comes from those traditions, and I believe that the power and influence it has had has come because it carries a small part of that energy with it. And this same voodoo vibe was more than just a lyrical device for Jimi Hendrix. A percussionist from West Africa who often played with the guitar god observed that many of the signature rhythms Jimi played on guitar were very often the same rhythms that his father played in voodoo ceremonies. And while for many all this may sound cool, dark, and mysterious, in the end it will be seen for what it is, a snare of the devil, where people ultimately become captive to his will.
Now, one of the biggest things about him was he believed that he was possessed by some spirit, and I got to believe it myself, and that's what we had to deal with all the time. And he was very humble about discussing it with people because he didn't want people to feel like he was being pretentious and so on. But he really believed it, and he was wrestling with it constantly.
Yeah, he used to always talk about some devil or something was in him, you know, and he didn't have any control over it. He didn't know what made him act the way he acted and what made him say the things he said, and songs and different things like that just come out of him, you know, and he'd say, I don't know what come over me, you know, I really can't understand it. And, you know, he used to just grab his hair or something, or pull his hair and just stand in the mirror or cry or something. Oh, Lord, it was so sad when he would cry. I mean, it seems like to me he was so tormented and just torn apart, and like he really was obsessed, you know, with something really evil.
And finally, this embrace of the occult has led to a curious phenomenon described in the Bible. The light has come into the world, and men love darkness rather than light because their deeds were evil. Where people in their fallenness move beyond rejecting light and loving darkness, and come to the place where they are fascinated with and even love death and hell itself. For example, besides riding the serpent and mainstreaming the venom of the do-what-thou-wilt worldview, Rock and Roll Hall of Famer Eric Burdon has also come face to face with the spiritual entities that slither beneath the surface. His entree to this occult world, like so many other rockers, was through the doorway of pharmakia, the sorcery that is psychotropic drugs. In his autobiography, he described an LSD trip he took with Andy Summers, guitarist for The Police. As he stared at a Hindu mural created by Summers, focusing on the figure of Kali, the goddess of death and destruction, he fell into a deep coma. Then I came face to face with Kali, Burdon remembered. I was covered in a void, darkness, darkness. Ah, so you need answers, said Kali. If you want information, you have to make me a gift. You've taken my sight, Burdon responded. What more do you want? She laughed a wicked, cruel laugh in the darkness. How much are you willing to give? My life, I said. My life was sucked out of me. I was gonzo, melted to the floor, dead. Compare this with a testimony of a student at Columbia University after she took part in an occult ritual led by Dr. Michael Harner, an anthropologist and practicing shaman.
I went down a couple of levels and then went even further to some area that was very gray and slimy and foggy, and I walked through that for a while and found another opening and went down even further. It was someplace I'd never been before, and it was kind of like a cave, and there were some beings in there, but I couldn't quite make out what they were. And I was just kind of sitting there with them, and all of a sudden they came at me with knives and tore me apart into all these pieces and tore my flesh off. And I was startled, but it didn't hurt.
And finally, there's the testimony of rock and roll's most focused, committed, and articulate neo-pagan, Genesis P-Orridge. In the occult magazine Gnosis, he enthusiastically described a life